My name's Camilla Bliss and I live and work in London, and I've just actually graduated from the Royal College of Art. Within the work I tend to play a lot, and it's very important to me, just because a lot of my work revolves around the imagination and that experimentation and just drawing out as much as I can through that kind of mental space, but working with your hands and the kind of dialogue between the materials and how the process is. So I tend to research a lot into symbols and motifs from ancient narratives, and I think specifically mythologies that with this work, this is where I was talking about the sirens, just focusing on a particular narrative that for me I can take and change and communicate how I might think about that today in our modern world. So it feels like there's a cyclical element to the work where it's all revolving and intertwined, and how we feel about these things today. But specifically with sirens, for me there's a relationship actually to technology, because of the sirens being both a seductive and destructive metaphor, and how with technology as well, specifically phones, how they draw you into these kind of other worlds or portholes looking into communication. And sirens have, they're known to be either historically mermaids or both harpies, which is half woman, half bird. So taking that notion of the siren, but then, looking at it through my own kind of invented narratives, which I do a lot in my work. So I used to work in a way that was quite really particular and already planned out what I felt, but more with this work, although I've been making models to help with understanding the space and how the works come together, it's changed through so many different processes, and even the meanings or narratives behind the work. So I think in that sense I like the way that if destruction as a word is not necessarily seen as something that's negative, but like positive in the form of creation and how you put things together. Usually I really react to the space I'm in, and I almost grow, like the work grows a bit like a fish in a bowl, like to the space, or seeing even how tall I am. There tends to be like the height of the sculptures or where I can reach. So yeah, it's been interesting not having the space and trying to imagine it, but I quite like that connection to the work, because it being about this expansive space, how things go beyond like our physical skin or body, or with the imagination how it goes further than what you can see, which I think is quite nice with why I chose to use the flooring to give that effect of an infinity kind of space, or something which you might think further that's moving as well with the light, this kind of shifting, evolving space. So within previous works I had been looking at water as a metaphor for the psyche, which again comes up in a lot of different cultures and references of this kind of fluid shifting space. So I think it's already present in the work, but I think it's always nice to think about the history of the space as well, so it feels right to have that element included as well. I tend to think a lot of the works to do with cleansing, and even so a previous work I've made, it's called the woodcutter bell, and the sound of the bell, the noises are very cleansing. I'm thinking for a sensory kind of noise, or it really grounds you, and I mean people use it to kind of mark the start and end of a meditation or something. So in that sense, I guess I've been looking into those kind of cleansing elements, not necessarily water literally, but it sort of ties in with those kind of aspects, I think. I like these fractured spaces where they're kind of like between states, or, you know, their dream space, or where things shift, or where there's a sense of transformation, where there's a potential for something, which I'm hoping will come through in this space, being a shifting space to activate imagination. Or, yeah, what do you see within the, I call them orifices, the red kind of dome-like shapes inside. And people tend to have an innate curiosity to look inside the works. I found that where they make like ceramic vessels and things, and I always notice people go straight to, so I wanted to like pull out people's behaviour. Well, it happens naturally, but yeah, kind of work with that, and how, I guess, the sirens as well are drawing you in with their songs. So I feel like these red shapes as well are kind of acting like forms of communication, the way they're all directed and interacting with each other, but also pulling in, hopefully, the audience. I have like a weird relationship to the digital, because it's one of those things that you know, you can't, it's so helpful, you can't live without it. We always have our phones on us, but then at the same time it is again so destructive and distracting, and so I like to play with those two elements together, having these very physical works, but then also there's quite a lot of references to the digital within it. I mean, I suppose talking about one as the siren, as these things that are drawing us in, but then also the way that the material on the forms is, I keep saying swiped on, just because of the way that we interact with our phones and these kind of like very physical things, but you're not so aware of them as a physical object, but you've kind of entered into that porthole. So again, the domes I see as these portholes drawing you in, that again, those references to digital. But I tend to use, yeah, I do use Photoshop and things actually to work out what I'm doing, because it helps me very quickly get an idea of colour and just the effect of how things can happen. And yeah, I tend to sketch digitally, which is strange because I'm very much a hands-on person. But yeah, just using what it has to offer as well, I think is important. So just creating a tension, I think, between the two elements is important. Also, just because at the moment we've been almost forced to communicate so much through the digital even more. So it feels like thinking of language, or how we use language, not necessarily verbal, but just sensory touch, or then I suppose that's one aspect of the reflective flooring is having this kind of surface which you can't enter, but it's there, but you've got a relationship with this kind of window or like porthole too. And the structures, although they're based originally, there is like looking at navigation buoys and these kind of structures that are floating but anchored in helping direct people if you read them correctly, but also they feel a little bit like aerials, or communicating between each other, or trying to send out information, but are you reading it correctly, or has that been destroyed, or a lack of, yeah, how you register and read things through a screen, I think is important, and that kind of like miscommunication in translation. I feel like, although my work is always so physical, and people might not, you know, necessarily know that I am looking at the digital when you look at it because it's so hands-on, but it feels like it's something that's always there within the work that you kind of can't live without, I think, which is how I feel like with computers and phones. They are just so essential and can help aid you, but then, yeah, that element of destruction as well. Yeah, I think I tend to make things quite tactile, as I want people to get closer into the works and want to touch it, and I don't mind if people do. I don't know whether I should say that. But yeah, wanting people to get drawn into the work to touch it, just because it brings you closer to really noticing a material. And I I think also when you have that like more sensory experience or awareness of your surroundings, it helps kind of ground you. But then I like the way there's this tension between how working with ceramics, for me it's like this grounding material that you can kind of really get lost in, but at the same time your imagination moves away, so you're drifting between states. So I think that's important within the work. People react in their own ways and they don't do it, but I think having the faces do draw people in, and they're specifically, yeah, there's more narratives around them because they originally started as what I call the guardian faces that are in a lot of my other ceramic works, these kind of protective elements. So it's almost as if the structures, the way that I see them, are these supposedly, you know, they're not going to harm you, they're, you know, this protective kind of element, kind of fragile skeletal structure, but then inside, even the pieces which are made in silver don't seem like there's anything particularly dangerous about them, but having this reference to sirens as just kind of alluding to something, and the kind of, a bit like we do with, I suppose, your social media presence. You can alter how you're seeing things or how you present something, or so yeah, having these, there are tongues inside some of them which are obviously a form of communication but also quite gory, or they're like reading stories about people whose tongues have been cut off, or even just like within the being silver-tongued, or is it double-tongued, about yeah, how you can manipulate language. Although I've done a few solo exhibitions before, they've always been a result of having done a residency. So you're working in the space and just sort of, because I do tend to play a lot with materials, so experimenting, but having a space that I wasn't in means that you really, well, I react and tend to think about the space, but it facilitated an area where I felt like I could really make this hopefully immersive space that I hadn't had the opportunity to do before with residencies, because it was more, they were a shorter time period, and yeah, more just working through developments and seeing what happens. So it's nice to have, yeah, the potential to actually really change a space, I think.